Predicting the future is difficult. Okay, some predictions are easy. The Lions will not win the Super Bowl, ever. The Senate will not convict the president, and Bibi Netanyahu will somehow find a way to hold on to power in Israel. But generally speaking, public predictions are difficult because when a rabbi does go out on a limb and make a bold prophecy from the bima, there is always one member of the congregation who remembers and will be sure to remind him of his folly a year later. In fact, predictions are so difficult that last week, Rabbi Kaluzny stood on this very bima and announced her refusal to participate in the Temple Israel tradition of a New Year's prediction sermon on the last Shabbat of the year. At which point I turned to Rabbi Hornston and whispered, "I can solve that problem. I'm speaking next week. I am going to deliver a sermon entitled, 'My Predictions for 2019. That way, I will be 100% correct in every prediction I make. As they say, hindsight is 20/20. As it turns out, the Torah is also brilliant about making predictions in hindsight. For instance, in Deuteronomy 34:5, it states, "So Moses, God's servant, died there." But wait a minute. According to tradition, it was Moses who wrote down the Torah. How could he have written about his own death? Clearly, the Torah is looking backward from the future, sort of like me making predictions for 2019. I bring all of this to you this evening because our portion, Vayigash, contains what I believe to be one of the most fascinating instances of a backward-looking prediction in the Torah. But it is subtle, so you might otherwise miss it. Remember where we left off last week. The sons of Joseph are standing trembling with fear before the imposing figure of the vice pharaoh of all Egypt. They have just been informed that the youngest brother, Benjamin, will serve as a hostage to ensure their return. This is when Judah, in our portion, bravely steps up and offers to sacrifice himself in order to secure Benjamin's freedom. "Now, therefore, I pray thee," he states, trembling, "let me abide instead of the lad as a bondsman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers, for how shall I go to my father without the lad and witness the anguish that this will cause him?" And it is this act of courage and generosity on the part of Judah that softens Joseph's heart. Like Nachshon at the Red Sea, Judah rushes headlong into the dangerous waters, and it is his act of bravery that causes the waters to part. Joseph sends his courtiers away and reveals himself tearfully to his brothers, forgives them for selling him into Egyptian slavery, and bids them to come live with him near the royal palace. Make no mistake about it. It is Judah who is the hero of this story. So, why is this a prediction from the future? Well, remember that each of the brothers represent one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And as you know, 10 of those tribes are eventually lost. The only two remaining tribes, the tribes which end up comprising the Jewish people, are Benjamin, and you guessed it, Judah, with Judah being by far the most dominant. That is why our religion is called Judaism. We are the descendants of Judah, and the victories always get to write the story. So in a Judaic sacred text, who would get to be the hero but Judah himself? Do you understand? Now, I know this is a bit arcane for those who are not history buffs, but I do believe that there is a practical application and one which we can bring to bear in our own lives in this new year. As I was researching the sermon, it occurred to me that this is exactly the advice I give to all of my wedding couples. You see, I don't do a great deal of premarital counseling anymore. After all, I am no longer marrying 18-year-olds to one another. Generally, these are 30-something-year-old adults, professionals who have experienced a good deal of life, are independent, worldly, and could probably teach me a thing or two about love. Instead, I tell them, I am going to teach you one skill. I then suggest that they rediscuss all of the issues that cause surus in young marriages: money, kids and career, taking one another for granted, religion, and yes, difficult parents. That's right. For my kids right now, Wendy and I are the difficult parents. In any case, these are topics they have already discussed ad nauseum, but not as 45-year-olds looking back on their lives from the future. And it works. Take the most inane of issues. When Wendy and I got married, we had a huge argument about soup. Should we serve hot soup or cold soup at the reception? 15 years later, I could not remember which soup I wanted or which soup we had. But I do remember the moment she slipped this ring on my finger, and we both felt Ruach Elohim, the wind of God from the book of Genesis, flowing through the open windows of our chuppah and uniting our souls together. From 15 years in the future, you see, soup just doesn't seem that important. But what about more important issues, like retaining romance in a relationship, which is a challenge for even the best marriages? Why a challenge? Because God has given us this amazing gift. It is called taking things for granted. If we could not take things for granted, we would stand stunned before every single flower and be unable to go to work and make a living. Thus, this gift is actually the foundation upon which our species survives. And yet, no marriage, no relationship has ever not suffered at one point from this great gift. The rabbis knew of this problem and provided a solution. Every Friday night, they insist, the bride and groom should stand before two romantic candles. No matter how hectic their week has been, they should hold hands, stare into the flames, say some ancient words, remember that their lives together are sacred. And then what do the rabbis do? They add some wine. It's a date. I'm telling you, it's a date. And if one thing leads to another and the husband doesn't get to watch the Pistons game until the fourth quarter, it's okay because nothing happens in basketball until the fourth quarter anyway. Lighting Shabbos candles is a wonderful way to begin a marriage together if you are looking backward from the future. I am 62 years old. In 15 years, I will be 77. And yes, I do use that marker as a looking back point to make all of my important decisions: financial, professional, relational. I ask myself, how will this decision play out for me, for my family, for my congregation when I am 75 or 77? I must say in this regard, I am very lucky. I have an older brother, if you will, Rabbi Harold Loss, who is almost 15 years or so ahead of me. And thus, I get to watch my future from the present. And what a wonderful mentor to have in this regard. Another example. As many of you know, I practice yoga regularly. After decades of practicing and stretching and sweating, I can't even touch my toes. So why do I do it? Because as I look around the yoga studio, I see that the 75-year-olds in my classes can still sit cross-legged on the floor and then rise up to standing without using their hands. That is amazing, considering how many of us can barely rise for the Baruch Hu. That is what I mean about planning your life from 15 years in the future. But it is not just personal decision-making that should be undertaken in this manner. Think what a better world this would be if we utilized this same skill in our society, in our politics, how less polluted our world would be, how much stronger our infrastructure would be, how many resources we would be pouring into renewable energy, scientific research, public transportation, and of course, education. So, what is my prediction for 2019? My prediction is that 2020 will only get better, at least if we will all begin looking back on our lives from the future with 2020 vision. Shabbat Shalom.